My phone keeps blowing up. All right. On to the posterior thigh. Starting with the semitendinosus, it originates at the ischial tuberosity of the end sacrotuberous ligament, the common head with the long head of the bicep femoris. It inserts at the medial to the tibial tuberosity and the pes anserineus. I don't remember that word at all. Along with the tendons of the gracilis and sartorius. Innervation is caused by the tibial division of the sciatic nerve, coming from L5, S1, and S2. And the actions are hip extension, and it stabilizes the pelvis in the sagittal plane, knee flexion, and medial rotation when the knee is flexed. We're getting some big words. With the semimembranosus. It originates at the ischial tuberosity of the ischium. It inserts at the medial tibial condyle, oblique ligament, and popliteus fascia. Innervation is caused by the tibial division of sciatic nerve, coming from L5, S1, and S2. And the actions are hip extension and stabilizes the pelvis in the sagittal plane, knee flexion, and medial rotation when the knee is flexed. Pretty much the same actions there. By pretty much, I mean exactly. Then we have the biceps femoris. Now you might be like, biceps? Those are in your arms. Biceps specifically just means that the muscle has two heads, I believe. That's all I'm talking about. Bi as in two, sep as in head. I don't know if that one's true. Don't quote me on that one. So the bicep femoris originates, the long head comes from the ischial tuberosity, the sacrotuberous ligament, the common head with the semitendinosus, and the short head originates at the lateral lip of the linea aspera in the middle third of the femur. It inserts at the head of the fibula, and the innervation, the long head is caused by the tibial division of the sciatic nerve, coming from L5, S1, and S2. And the short head innervates comes from the common fibular division of the sciatic nerve, also coming from L5, S1, and S2. The actions caused are the hip joint. The long head causes extension and stabilizes the pelvis in the sagittal plane, knee flexion, and a lateral rotation when the knee is flexed. Now we're on to the anterior thigh. That was the posterior thigh. Anterior thigh. First one we have is the pectineus. The origin is the pecten pubis. The insertion inserts at the femur, specifically the pectineal line and the proximal linea aspera. Innervation is caused by the femoral nerve and the obturator nerve, coming from L2 and L3. The actions caused are hip joint abduction, external rotation, and slight flexion. Stabilizes the pelvis in the coronal and sagittal planes as well. Then we have sartorius, which originates at the anterior superior iliac spine. It inserts at the medial to the tibial tuberosity, together with the gracilis and the semitendinosus. Innervation is caused by the femoral nerve, coming from L2 and L3. And the actions are hip joint flexion, abduction, and external rotation, knee joint flexion, and internal rotation. Then they have the iliopsoas. Iliopsoas. It originates, so the psoas minor comes from T12 to L1, the vertebrae, and the intervertebral disc, the lateral surfaces. Then psoas major. The superficial part originates at T12 through L4 and associated intervertebral discs, while the deep part originates at L1 to L5 vertebrae, the transverse processes, and the iliacus originates at the iliac fossa. Insertions. So the psoas minor inserts at, is this getting loud or is this in my head? I feel like this is getting quite loud. I know it's just this part of the song, or this song specifically, but I feel like this one is quite loud. That's better. Sorry for the interruption. Alright. So, what was I talking about? Insertion. The psoas minor inserts at the iliopectineal arch. The psoas major inserts at the lesser trochanter. And the iliacus inserts at the lesser trochanter as well. Innervation is caused for the psoas. It's caused by the direct branches from the lumbar plexus, coming from L2 to L4. And the iliacus innervation is caused by the femoral nerve, coming from L2 to L4. The actions, the psoas minor assists in upward rotation of the pelvis, while psoas major and iliacus cause hip joint flexion and external rotation of the lumbar spine. External rotation. Lumbar spine unilateral contraction with the femur fixed. It bends the trunk laterally to the same side. Bilateral contraction raises the trunk from the supine position. Does that make sense to anybody? Me neither. All right. Then we have a quadriceps femoris. So the origins for all four heads of the quads. The rectus femoris originates at the anterior inferior iliac spine and the acetabular roof of the hip joint. Then the vastus medialis originates at the linea aspera, the medial lip, and the intertrochanteric line, the distal part. Then you have vastus lateralis, which originates at the linea aspera as well, but the lateral lip, and the greater trochanter, the lateral surface. And finally, you have the vastus intermedius, which originates at the femoral shaft, the anterior side. Insertion, all four of the heads insert at the tibial tuberosity via the patella ligament. And then the innervation is caused by the femoral nerve coming from L2 to L4. And the action is knee joint extension. And specifically the rectus femoris causes hip joint flexion and knee joint extension. All right, and then that marks the end of the, what did I say? What were we doing? Posterior thigh? Yeah, sure. I'll go back up and look. But my music ended, so we have to swap to this one. I'm gonna take a look ahead at what's coming here. I'm just taking a look at the music. You know, what am I gonna hear right now? Ooh, I'm excited for some of that. Okay. All right. Back we go. To start, let me just see what we just did. That was the anterior thigh. Okay. So now we're doing the medial thigh. The medial thigh. First, we have the adductor longus, which originates at the superior pubic ramus and anterior side of the symphysis. It inserts at the femur, the linea aspera, the medial lip in the middle third of the femur. Innervation is caused by the obturator nerve, coming from L2 to L4. And the actions are hip joint adduction and flexion up to 70 degrees, extension past 80 degrees of flexion, and stabilizes the pelvis in the coronal and sagittal planes. Next muscle is the adductor brevis. It originates at the inferior pubic ramus. It inserts at the femur, linea aspera, and medial lip of the middle third of the femur. Innervation is the obturator nerve coming from L2 and L3. And the actions are hip joint adduction and deflection up to 70 degrees, extension past 80 degrees of flexion, and stabilizes the pelvis in the coronal and sagittal planes. Next is the adductor magnus. The origin is the inferior pubic ramus, the ischial ramus, and the ischial tuberosity. Insertion, the deep part inserts. It's a fleshy insertion, apparently. It inserts at the medial lip of the linea aspera, while the superficial part, which is a tendinous insertion, inserts at the adductor tubercle of the femur. Innervation, the deep part is innervated by the obturator nerve, coming from L2 to L4, and the superficial part is innervated by the tibial nerve, coming from L4. Actions caused are hip joint adduction, extension, and slight flexion. The tendinous insertion is also active in internal rotation, and it stabilizes the pelvis in the coronal and sagittal plane. Then we have gracilis, which originates at the inferior pubic ramus below the symphysis, inserts at the tibia, the medial border of the tuberosity, along with the tendons of sartorius and semitendinosus. Innervation is caused by the obturator nerve coming from L2 and L3, and the actions caused are hip joint adduction and flexion, knee joint flexion, and internal rotation. Next is the obturator externus, which originates at the outer surface of the obturator membrane and its bony boundaries. It inserts at the trochanteric fossa of the femur. Innervation is caused by the obturator nerve coming from L3 and L4. And then the actions caused are hip joint adduction and external rotation, and it stabilizes the pelvis in the sagittal plane. Hey, and then a chart for the synergist muscles of the pelvis and thigh. So the coxal hip joint, this is this whole chart. Okay, all right, okay. So the flexion. All these muscles cause and help with flexion. You have the psoas major, the iliacus, the tensor fascia latae, the sartorius, the rectus femoris, gluteus medius, the anterior fibers, gluteus minimus, adductor longus assists, pectineus assists, adductor brevis assists, and the adductor magnus assists. Next is extension. The gluteus maximus, all fibers, bicep femoris, the long head, semitendinosus, semimembranosus, adductor magnus, the posterior fibers, gluteus medius, the posterior fibers. And we have medial rotation, which is caused by the gluteus medius, the anterior fibers, gluteus minimus, tensor fascia latae, adductor magnus, adductor longus, adductor brevis, pectineus, gracilis, semitendinosus assists, and the semimembranosus assists. Then we have the lateral rotation, which is caused by the gluteus maximus, all fibers, piriformis, quadratus femoris, obturator internus, obturator externus, gemellus superior, gemellus inferior, gluteus medius, posterior fibers, the psoas major, iliacus, sartorius, biceps femoris, assists the long head specifically. Next is abduction, which has the gluteus maximus, all fibers, gluteus medius, all fibers, gluteus minimus, tensor fascia latae, sartorius, piriformis when the hip is flexed. And finally, with adduction, we have the adductor magnus, adductor longus, adductor brevis, pectineus, gracilis, gluteus maximus, the lower fibers specifically. That's a big chart, man. Oh, need some water. Take a sip, take a swig. Dude, I don't even know what this song is from. I'm getting like major Naruto vibes, but I don't think that's what this is. I have no idea what this is too.